Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 284, we got Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski for the lightweight title. Islam Makhachev won the fight via unanimous decision, but it was a very controversial unanimous decision with a lot of fans and fighters believing that Alexander Volkanovski should have won this fight. I'm not going to rehash that. I've already done 2 videos on the topic. I will link them both down in the description. But since this fight was so competitive, since this fight was so close, since so many people thought Alexander Volkanovski won and ultimately Islam Makhachev got the decision, there is a lot of people clamoring for Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski 2. There is people wanting the immediate rematch for the lightweight title to give Alexander Volkanovski another opportunity to become double champion. And I wanted to make this video because I absolutely do not want to see that, at least in 2023. And I am praying to the MMA gods that Alexander Volkanovski does not get a second shot at Islam Makhachev for at least the rest of 2023. I do not want to see it. This is going to be kind of a matchmaker video. I'm going to primarily talk about the featherweight division and the lightweight division and what I think should happen next in each division. But also, because there was only really 3 quality fights on the UFC 284 card, one of the other ones being the featured fight on the main card, Jack Della Maddalena versus Randy Brown, I wanted to do a future matchup for what I think is next for Jack Della Maddalena as well. So I'm going to start off with that, and then I'm going to talk about the featherweight and lightweight title picture and what I think should happen with Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski. So Jack Della Maddalena went out there. Super impressive performance against Randy Brown. Stops him in the first round via rear naked choke. And now he's won all 4 of his UFC fights via first round stoppage. And Randy Brown was the biggest step up in competition. And he clipped him, face planted him, and then ended up getting a rear naked choke to defeat him. And now I really think we need a big step up in competition in the welterweight division for Jack Della Maddalena. And if you look at the rankings, I really don't think, you're going to get a super highly ranked guy for Jack Della Maddalena yet. It's probably going to be somebody around that top 10 to 15 range. And if you look at the current top 10 to 15, you have Shavkat Rakhmonov at number 10. I doubt that's going to happen because Shavkat Rakhmonov has a fight coming up against Jeff Neal. If he wins that fight, he's going to be in title contention. That's happening at UFC 285. Then you have Jorge Masvidal. He's matched up with Gilbert Burns at UFC 287, so that's not going to happen. Then you have number 12, Michael Chiesa, who is facing number 15, Li Jingliang, so that fight's not going to happen. Neither one of those fights is going to happen. And then you have Neil Magny at number 13. Neil Magny is a viable option, but who wants to see that? We just watched Neil Magny get mauled by Gilbert Burns. I don't think a lot of people are clamoring to see Jack Della Maddalena versus Neil Magny. I know Neil Magny has kind of always been the measuring stick of the welterweight division, the gatekeeper of really like the top 15. But for me personally, that's the last fight I want to see. If the UFC booked that, I wouldn't be hyped for that fight whatsoever. But I would kind of understand it. Okay, they essentially get Jack Della Maddalena a decent fight, a guy who's ranked in the top 15 to get him a top 15 spot. And then you get to number 14. And number 14 is Michel Pereira. He had a fight coming up with Sean Brady, who's ranked number 8. But guess what? Sean Brady pulled out with an injury. This was supposed to take place March 25th. And now Michel Pereira is left without an opponent. And there's not a whole lot of guys to step in and fight Michel Pereira. It's probably going to be an unranked guy if anybody steps in. And I know Jack Della Maddalena says, I want to take a vacation. I don't necessarily, he didn't want to have a quick turnaround. But I think the fight that makes sense right now, maybe they delay it a little bit. Maybe it's in April instead of March to give him a little bit more time. I think the UFC should make, and I think this is the fight that makes the most sense out of any potential matchups, Jack Della Maddalena versus Michel Pereira. I just think it makes perfect sense. You have Michel Pereira, who's on a 5-fight win streak himself, who's looking for a step up in competition. I know he just fought Santiago Ponzinibbio. He won via split decision. It was a close fight, could have went either way. And then before that, all the opponents that he's faced, they've been okay competition. Andre Fialho, Nico Price, Chaos Williams. But I still would like to see him fight some legit competition. But he was supposed to get that step up against Sean Brady. Ultimately didn't get it. And now there's nobody available. And I think there is something to be said to have a surging contender with a lot of hype behind them, like Jack Della Maddalena. If Pereira can go out there and be able to stop Jack Della Maddalena. Now, let's say that fight doesn't happen. What would be another option for him? There's not a whole lot of options, but I think the next best option would be number 9 ranked Vicente Luque. First off, both of those fights, whether it's Jack Della Maddalena versus Michel Pereira or Jack Della Maddalena versus Vicente Luque, both of those are banger fights, highly fan-friendly. I think it's going to be super competitive, and I think it's going to answer a lot of questions. The only reason I kind of don't want this is because typically, the UFC likes to match guys up who are both on winning streaks. Vicente Luque's lost his last 2 fights. He got KO'd by Jeff Neal in his last fight in August, and then before that, he lost a dominant decision to Bilal Muhammad where he got out-grappled. But I still think this would be a phenomenal fight. Vicente Luque's up there in that top 10. The UFC obviously wants to promote Jack Della Maddalena. If he can go out there and get a stoppage win over Vicente Luque, you're then propelling Jack Della Maddalena potentially in the top 10 of the welterweight division. So I think that's another option. Outside of those 2 options, I don't think there's a whole lot of options in terms of opponents for Jack Della Maddalena in the rankings. So I really do believe it has to be either Vicente Luque or Michel Pereira. I don't think any of these other matchups make sense unless he waits out to see like the winner of Michel or the winner of Li Jingliang versus Michael Chiesa, something along those lines. But I think the 2 matchups that I mentioned make the most sense. And I think the one they should make is Jack Della Maddalena versus Michel Pereira. Now, as far as the featherweight division, you have Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett. Yair Rodriguez defeats Josh Emmett, puts on an absolute striking clinic, nasty body kicks, nasty head kicks, and now he is the interim featherweight champion. Well, the reason there was an interim featherweight champion on the line is because you had Alexander Volkanovski moving up to the lightweight weight class to fight Islam Makhachev for the lightweight belt. So they didn't want to hold up the division. They decided to do an interim belt. Well, now you have a situation where the fight was very competitive. I think people doubted Volkanovski going into this fight, so the performance that Volkanovski put up impressed so many people, and Volkanovski's stock went through the roof, that so many people want to see this rematch. But for me personally, the fight you have to make at featherweight, it has to be Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez. This is the biggest featherweight fight, in my opinion, since Jose Aldo versus Conor McGregor back at UFC 194. I mean, Yair Rodriguez looks so good against Josh Emmett, and he's one of the most dynamic strikers I've ever seen. He goes out there, he's one of the most vicious strikers I've ever seen. He's so reckless, he's so creative with his striking. And as good as Volkanovski looked against Islam Makhachev, this would be the first time in a while. And it's crazy because I think Volkanovski's stock went through the roof fighting Islam Makhachev. This would be the first time in a while that I felt like, holy crap, Alexander Volkanovski could lose. Because Yair Rodriguez, the striking is so dynamic. The kicking is so powerful. I believe Volkanovski is going to have to go out there, be very technical on the feet, be super defensively responsible, and mix in his grappling. And I really believe that a fight between Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez should be a main event of a pay-per-view. That's how big I believe that fight is. And it's very rare that you have an interim champion then defend that interim belt. Usually when the UFC makes an interim belt, it's a one fight and then they unify with the champion. You don't typically have an interim title holder then end up defending the belt. So I really think it's now. Now is the time to make Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez. This would be a massive featherweight fight, and it's such a compelling matchup. Like, I'm genuinely dying to see this fight. And for Islam Makhachev, I understand that, you know, the fight was very competitive, and people want to see it ran back. Islam Makhachev won the fight, okay? It was a very close fight. I really want to see Islam Makhachev versus Beneil Dariush. I know there's been rumblings about Beneil Dariush versus Charles Oliveira at UFC 288. That has not yet been confirmed. Oliveira has said himself they are in negotiations for that. The UFC has negotiations all the time for fights that never end up coming to fruition. So I think the UFC should forget about Beneil Dariush versus Charles Oliveira, unless Islam Makhachev is going to be out for a while, and they should book Islam Makhachev versus Beneil Dariush for the lightweight title. And I think this is an amazing fight, and I think the fact that Volkanovski showed such excellent wrestling defense against Islam and made Islam Makhachev look human, I think that makes Islam Makhachev versus Beneil Dariush even better now, because that air of invincibility around Islam Makhachev is now gone. So I think in the next, I would say 5 to 6 months, they should book Islam Makhachev versus Beneil Dariush for the lightweight title and Alexander Volkanovski versus Jair Rodriguez for the featherweight title. And hell, if the UFC really wants to get crazy, they should book them both on the same card, in my opinion. I understand that people want to see this rematch. I understand that people think that Volkanovski should have got the decision. But I feel like this was the best case scenario for everyone. Because if Alexander Volkanovski challenges Islam Makhachev for the belt again, that's not going to happen for best case scenario another 5 to 6 months anyway. And then you're holding up the featherweight division and you're holding up the lightweight division, two of the most stacked divisions in all the UFC. So I really think they should fight some contenders. I think both of those fights are massive for the division. And let's say you have Alexander Volkanovski go out there and defeat Yair Rodriguez. Let's say it happens in May at UFC 288. I'm just throwing out a hypothetical date. And then you have Islam Makhachev maybe in August or September defeat Beneil Dariush to retain his lightweight belt. I think then is the time, early 2024, you book Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski too. How incredible would that be? To book that rematch after they both go their separate ways. I believe both of their stocks should have went up. I know a lot of people are crapping on Islam Makhachev. The fact that he went out there and fought one of the best fighters in the world in Alexander Volkanovski and won, even if you disagree that he won, it was super competitive. I think his stock should go up, especially considering how his striking looked. And imagine if he goes out there and beats Beneil Dariush. And then imagine Volkanovski goes out there and takes out Yair Rodriguez. Both of their stocks would be unbelievably high. And that second fight, and it's a true super fight. People throw the word super fight around and around and around and around, and it's never really actually true. This is a true super fight, champion versus champion. And if you have both these guys go take out the best contender in their respective divisions, and then about a year from now, meet back up for another super fight in a rematch, I think this would be massive. And I think the opposite, if they just book it again, I don't think it would be anywhere near as big. And I understand, a lot of times when we play these games, the fights never end up happening because, somebody ends up losing. But that's just the state of MMA. That's just what happens. That's the chance we have to take to build a massive fight. And I think if they book it right away, you have, Beneil Dariush, you have Rafael Fiziev, you have guys like Arman Tsarukyan, Jalen Turner making their way up the ranks in one of the most stacked divisions in the UFC. And now it's being held up. And I understand it would still be held up a little bit if they booked it a year from now, but it would be far less held up if they defend a title at least once before they fight each other again. Because even you look at the featherweight division, you have Arnold Allen. He's fighting Max Holloway, but he's on the come up. You have Yair Rodriguez, who's the interim champ. You have Ilya Topuria, Movsar Evloev. You have so many great guys in the featherweight division. I would hate to see that division log jammed because they have to do this immediate rematch. And I would much prefer go fight one fight, win that fight, rebook Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski 2, and rebook it a year from now. I think putting some time in between the fights makes it so much better. I don't want to see it ran back immediately. And what a fight that will be. Imagine both guys coming in, making minor adjustments in a rematch. I am dying to see Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski 2. Don't get me wrong. I just want them to go defend their titles in their divisions. Don't let those divisions get log jammed with contenders. And then they can meet back up in about a year for one of the biggest super fights in UFC history. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.